There once was a philosopher who was the pessimist of pessimists, a man who said the problem doesn't start with your first heartbreak, or your first failure, or the day you finally understand you're going to die. He said the problem starts on the day you're born. The man who said it isn't even worth killing yourself, because you always do it too late anyway. Who spent his whole life circling the idea of not existing, unable to leave it alone, unable to do anything about it either. His name was Emil Cioran, and his best-known book says everything in its title: The Trouble with Being Born. Not the trouble with dying, the other end of it. He treats birth as the actual catastrophe, bigger than anything that follows, because every later wound depends on that first one having happened. We have lost, he wrote, being born, as much as we shall lose, dying, everything. This wasn't a new complaint dressed up as a new one. The Greeks told a version of it centuries earlier. King Midas captures a wood spirit named Silenus and forces him to name the single best thing for a human being. The answer, preserved later by Nietzsche, was brutal. Best not to be born at all. Second best, to die soon. Cioran didn't invent that wound. He refused to let a modern audience pretend it had healed. I read that line at 19 and rolled my eyes. Very dramatic, I thought. A few years later, I did the actual math on my own existence. How many strangers, how many accidents of timing had to line up exactly right for me to be the one thinking that thought at all? The eye roll didn't survive the math. You've done that math too, probably on some slow night. The two specific people, the one specific year, the version of you that almost never happened and somehow did. But naming a wound doesn't explain why the wounded keep getting up. If existence really was imposed on us like weather on someone with no coat, why does almost nobody actually want out? His answer isn't flattering. The will to keep going is older and faster than the thought that questions it. Reason shows up to that argument late, after the body has already decided. Cioran refused to be called a philosopher, and he meant that as an insult to the profession. Philosophers build systems, staircases you're supposed to climb toward a conclusion. He thought a system is just a wall a frightened mind builds, so it never has to face what it's afraid of. So he wrote in fragments instead, short lines that sometimes contradict each other. Because for him, philosophy was never a search for truth. It was a symptom, proof that something in the human animal had broken in a way no argument was going to fix. A fox doesn't interrogate its own existence before breakfast. Somewhere in us, a second pair of eyes switched on, watching the first pair, and it never switches back off. He called that a wound, disguised as an achievement. This is also, biographically, where his philosophy starts. In his 20s, in Romania, he stopped sleeping, not for a week, for years. Insomnia wasn't a medical inconvenience for him. It was a philosophical state. Everything he ever wrote, he said, came out of those nights, because a sleepless mind loses access to the small daily illusions that let everyone else get through a Tuesday without asking why. There's a modern echo of this that has nothing to do with philosophy. People who study chronic insomnia describe cortical hyperarousal, a nervous system that refuses to power down at night, keeping threat monitoring circuitry lit long after it should have gone dark. The same networks tied to rumination, the mind looping back on itself uninvited, stay unusually active in people who can't stop thinking after midnight. That doesn't prove Cioran's metaphysics. It confirms his complaint has a body attached to it. And here's where he gets stranger, not sadder. Cioran wasn't drawn to leaving life. He was oddly precise about that. Wanting to end something still assumes a self who wants something. What he actually circled was colder, closer to wishing he had never been the kind of thing capable of wanting at all. He could stare at that idea for pages. He could never arrive there, because thinking is exactly what non-being would end. The mind that dreams of silence is, by definition, still making noise. What interested him, underneath everything, was never the act itself. It was the door. Just knowing an exit exists, somewhere, unused, changes how the whole room feels. He lived to 79, writing the entire time, which tells you something his own theory doesn't explain. The idea of leaving wasn't a plan. It was what let him stay. Albert Camus disagreed with him on this, and the disagreement sharpens both men. Camus opens the myth of Sisyphus by calling the choice to keep living the one truly serious philosophical question, then argues the honest answer is defiance, not exit, imagining Sisyphus, almost happy, pushing his rock back up the hill forever. Cioran read the same absurd universe and wanted no hero in it. He wanted permission to keep looking straight at the thing without performing a smile about it. There's a part of his life his admirers usually skip. In his 20s, before any of this, Cioran wrote in sympathy with Romania's fascist movement, seduced by exactly the kind of grand historical promise he'd spend the rest of his life demolishing. He called it, later, the great shame of his life. It's also the most honest evidence behind his lifelong suspicion of hope. He'd watched a promise of national salvation curdle into fanaticism and then into ruins, and came to see progress itself as religion's replacement in a secular century. Same shape of salvation, just moved from heaven into the future tense. That claim deserves real pushback, not just repetition. Centuries of falling violence and disease are measurable, not illusions. His own history is exactly why despair shouldn't get trusted automatically just because it sounds more honest than hope. He never settled his account with God either. He walked away from the church his own father served, then spent his life circling mystics and saints anyway, hungry for an ecstasy he could no longer make himself believe in. Underneath all of it sat the clock, the past sealed shut, available only as distortion. The future a screen you keep mistaking for a real place. The present, the one tense you're supposed to live in, slipping out from under you the instant you notice you're standing in it. You felt a good evening end while it was still going, already grieving it mid-laugh. And underneath the clock, solitude. Cioran thought the deepest human experiences never actually cross the gap between two people. You can describe pain. You cannot transmit it. Every relationship is a temporary truce with that isolation, not a cure for it. Every achievement collapses into the same insignificance in front of one fact. It ends. He found more honesty in failure than in success, because failure doesn't require you to keep lying about how much any of it mattered. So where does that leave someone who isn't writing books in Paris, who has to be somewhere in 6 hours? Cioran's own answer, near the end, was strange. He didn't recommend meaning. He recommended lucidity without letting it curdle into indifference. Seeing clearly, he thought, can strip away every illusion and still leave you standing. Stop waiting for a reason to arrive before you're allowed to feel steady. Expect less from the ending of your own story, so disappointment has less to grab onto. And when the heavy thought shows up, the one asking why bother at all, don't argue it down, and don't obey it either. Do what Cioran quietly did for 79 years. Get up anyway. Maybe there was never going to be an argument good enough to justify staying. Maybe it was never going to be a reason. Maybe it was always going to be smaller than that. A habit, a stubbornness, a body that keeps choosing the next hour without asking the mind's permission first. Cioran, who trusted almost nothing by the end, wrote it plainly. One cannot live without motives. I have no motives left, and I am living. If none of it was ever going to add up to a justification, that's the last honest question standing. Is that the tragedy? Or is that, finally, where the freedom starts?